Are you a manual therapist ready to expand your clinical reach and deepen your effectiveness? Upledger Craniosacral Therapy addresses deep restrictions, supports neurological and fascial systems, and enhances whole body function by working with the body's natural healing processes. For over 40 years, Upledger Institute International has led the field of craniosacral therapy, offering an approach that integrates seamlessly into any manual therapy practice and supports common to complex and chronic conditions. Find a class near you at upledger.com/courses or call 800-233-5880 extension 2 and begin your craniosacral therapy training for as little as $100 a month. Building your own practice? You're not alone. Many massage therapists balance multiple work environments while growing their businesses. Hand and Stone offers flexible scheduling and a built-in membership base, making it easier to create consistent income while starting or supplementing your existing practice. Work the shifts that fit your goals while we handle the marketing, bookings, and operations. Find your local Hand and Stone spa at handandstone.com and explore the possibilities today.
I'm Darren Buford, and welcome to the ABMP Podcast, a podcast that speaks to the massage and bodywork community. Before we jump into today's episode, I want to give you a little context. This conversation originally aired on our sister association's podcast, ASCP SD Talk, but the topic reaches well beyond the aesthetics profession. Changes surrounding the Department of Education's Do No Harm rules and Title IV funding could have important implications for career education and the schools that train the next generation of wellness professionals. Whether you're a massage therapist, educator, school owner, or simply someone invested in the future of our profession, we thought this was a conversation worth sharing. In this episode, ASCP's Maggie Stasek is joined by ASCP Government Relations Director Laura Puryear and higher education attorney Aaron Lacey to break down what's happening, what schools should know, and what could come next. Here's Maggie with ASCP SD Talk.
Today, we're talking about a topic that has had a lot of estheticians, educators, and school owners paying close attention over the past year: the Department of Education's Do No Harm rules. Joining us are Laura Puryear, ASCP's Government Relations Director, and Aaron Lacey, co-chair of Thompson Coburn's Higher Education Practice, to help us understand what these changes mean for the future of aesthetics education. Laura has been on the podcast before, and we're excited to have her back. But before we dive in, here's a little background on Laura. Laura brings over 10 years of lobbying and advocacy experience. From the campaign trail to the state legislature, she's no stranger to state politics and policy. Her passion is advocating for your right to keep practicing your craft, whether it's aesthetics, cosmetology, or massage therapy. We are thrilled to be joined by Aaron Lacey. Aaron has over 2 decades of experience helping institutions navigate complex legal and policy matters. Aaron has a deep understanding of the post-secondary regulatory framework, including requirements related to the federal financial aid programs, accreditation, and state authorization. The host of Thompson Coburn's popular higher education webinar series and editorial director of Redjucation, the firm's higher education law and policy blog. Aaron is a frequent writer, speaker on topics relating to higher education policy and regulation. Laura and Aaron, welcome to the show. We're so glad to have you here.
Thanks, Maggie.
Yeah, very glad to be here.
Okay, for those of us that haven't been following along, tell us about the new framework that's been introduced and what's going on with Title IV funding.
So there have been a lot of changes in the Department of Ed, especially in Trump's second term. So in his administration, he has made it very clear that his intent is to dismantle the Department of Ed. It is a massive agency. It's been around since 1979, so that's not something that you can just snap your fingers and do. So one of the most recent changes they've made is to financial transparency and earning metrics. So that's going to impact Title IV funding for schools and students, specifically direct loans and Pell funds. The new rules, and Aaron, jump in anytime, the new rules are switching from the financial value transparency and switching to a different measurement tool. So essentially what they want to do now is determine if you go into a higher ed program, if you come out of that financially better off than you would have if you had not gone to it, if you just had a high school diploma or a GED. The math around it is complicated, and there are different metrics for different types of programs, but the initial rule came out and there was a lot of blowback.
And I'll just take a little step back and say that, this is sort of the culmination of a 15-year effort. The second administration or second term Obama administration was the first to introduce a concept like this that involved measuring in some way the debt that was being taken on by graduates and their earnings following graduation. The first Trump administration did away with that rule. Then the Biden administration put it back in place, and they added, not only were they doing what we call a debt to earnings metric, where they were sort of comparing the debt or cost that a student took on to what they were making after they graduated, but notably, the Biden administration also introduced a straight earnings test. And so the idea was, we're going to do two different tests for each program. We're going to do this debt to earnings ratio, but also on the other side, we're just going to look at how much people are making about 3 years after they graduate from these programs. And what we're talking about is the median earnings of a group of folks who graduated during a particular period of time. So about 3 years ago, we'll get that data from the IRS, and then we're going to compare it to some sort of benchmark that we're all going to agree is an appropriate benchmark. And Maggie, I think you said it the best way. The idea is that the benchmark represents what folks are making out there who don't have any post-secondary education. And sort of philosophically, the notion is if you go and get a post-secondary education, then on average, folks should be making more than those who have no post-secondary education at all. And so then what's interesting is that rule is still out there. Even today, that Biden-era gainful employment rule is sitting on the books. But the Trump administration came along and Congress, to be really clear, as part of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, in statute for the first time in history, included an earnings accountability framework as well. And they said, yeah, we like this idea of a straight earnings test. So that's the Republicans in Congress. And they said, we're going to create a framework and we're going to test all of the degree programs using this same idea. We're going to see how much folks are making, in this case, about 4 years after they graduate from the program. So a couple of really important points here to highlight out of the gates. I mean, the first is you've got a Biden administration and regulation introducing an earnings test, a straight earnings test. And then you've got Republicans in Congress also embracing a straight earnings test. So in a period of time where we've got all this partisanship, you've got a bipartisan consensus around this notion that there should be some sort of straight earnings test applied to institutions of higher education. And at the political level, this is really Congress's attempt to answer the college costs too much issue. Whether that is whether this is an effective way to do it or not, I think is subject to a lot of good debate. But that is what they're trying to do. And the other thing that's really important to note is, and I mentioned this earlier, it is the first time that we have something like this in statute. And I say that because I've had a lot of folks who've been on this ride for 15 years ask me, should we really care that much, right? I mean, we've seen this. It came back with Obama and then it got beat, and then Obama tried again and it got beat again, and then Trump took it away and then Biden brought it back. I mean, but nobody's ever lost eligibility under one of these schemes. Is a court case going to knock it down? Should we just stay the course and kind of ignore it? And my view is, no, it's different this time around. One, we've got statute for the first time. This isn't just a regulatory invention. You've got Congress saying we think something like this works, even though the congressional version only applied to degree programs. You still have Congress endorsing this idea in a general way. And then also, for the first time, we have a Republican administration that's embracing it. Previously, the Trump administration got rid of this idea, but now they sort of moved forward with it, and in a bipartisan way said, we, the Republicans on the Hill, and also the Democrats who preceded us, all agree that an earnings test is something that we should be paying attention to. So I'll just start out the podcast by saying I think it is really important for folks to take this seriously. And I think many in massage therapy, cosmetology, estheticians, and others are taking it seriously, which I think is smart, because there's a lot to be thoughtful about. And I think there are certain things that you might be able to do, but there's a limited time frame potentially in which to do them. I'll take a breath there.
No, that's perfect. And I want to clarify that we, in general, and I think most in the industry, don't take issue with accountability. There is an issue with student debt. There is an issue with affordability in higher education. And so people want to see something. The question is whether or not this is, like you said, a good way of going about it. One point of contention was, you mentioned that in OB3, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, it was originally only outlined for degree programs. One of the issues is that the way that the Department of Ed interpreted it included non-degree programs. So that sweeps up massage therapy, aesthetics, cosmetology, nail schools, and other things. There are other trades. There's the restaurant industry that got caught up in it. And so that's one issue, is many think that it was a bit of an overreach on the department's part. But also the formula is kind of flawed because it does not include a change in calculation for regional disparities, gender disparity. A lot of our professions, massage, cosmetology, aesthetics, they have a very high occurrence of women who work in the industry, own their own businesses. And so there's a difference there. And the biggest issue we see is tipped professions where the majority of your income comes from tips. So that kind of leads us to the change in the final rule. Our organizations were heavily involved in advocating for a change or an exception because of that. I know Thompson Coburn was heavily involved in that as well. I want to talk a little bit about the final rule and the difference between that and the original rule that was proposed. So what is your take on the differences between the final rule that was issued and the original proposal?
Yeah. And if I can just take a couple of seconds to say, and one thing Maggie didn't mention at the outset, but listeners should know, is that I was one of the negotiated rulemakers at the table. When this rulemaking was ongoing, I represented private nonprofit universities and institutions at the table. But most of the things you just said, we made those arguments at the table, and I've made them in writing. We submitted, requests for the department to be thoughtful about them. And I completely agree. There's no doubt in my mind that one of the things we kept saying at the table over and over is that, because sometimes folks who are supportive of this rule would say, well, this rule is about, stopping low quality programs. We say, no, this rule does not measure program quality. It doesn't measure the quality of the faculty, the staff, the instruction, the inputs that are going into the program. It doesn't measure the outcomes of the program, graduation or placement rates. It doesn't measure the value to society. And for that matter, it does not measure lifetime financial value of the program. All it measures is how much graduates are making 4 years after they graduate. That is the only thing that it measures. It also doesn't take into account the cost of the program. It's just how much people are making. So to your point, if you're in a profession where your graduates are not typically making a lot of money 4 years after they graduate, so massage therapy, cosmetology, a lot of arts programs, music programs, Juilliard's Bachelor's of Music program fails this test. And that's not because it's a bad program. It's because their graduates are waiting tables and trying to make it as musicians in New York City after they graduate. So it's really important to just acknowledge what you said and emphasize it. This is not a measure of program quality. The only thing it measures is how much folks are making 4 years after they graduate. And to your point, there are a lot of issues even with that idea. Tipped income, self-income, right? You've got a lot of folks in your industry who are self-employed. They're really contractors, right? In a lot of states, not a lot of folks on W-2s. Many of the folks you educate, like you say, are women and minorities and are subject to wage discrimination in the broader market. So all of those things are really not accounted for. Those arguments were made at the table. They were made in public comment, and the department, for the most part, barreled through them. And it very strongly had this idea. Oh, also, you're absolutely right. The statutory language does not authorize the department to extend this concept to non-degree programs, right? They are using this good old-fashioned gainful employment rationalization to justify under statute the extension of this thing in non-degree programs. And I'm certain that will be litigated. It's the gainful employment program is already subject to litigation, that regulation, and I believe this new rule will also be subject to litigation. But to answer your question, there weren't a lot of changes between the proposed rule and the final rule. 2 or 3 things that were, clearly very important. I mean, one is the tipped income concept. So the department did come forward with this idea that there's a change in federal law that allows folks to, it's a softer way of addressing tipped income and not necessarily taxing it, so that it encourages folks to report that tipped income where previously they may not be because of tax consequences. And that takes effect in 2026. So the first year that the department runs these numbers, they're going to be looking at income reported in 2025. And what they did was in the final rule, they said, okay, for a certain select number of programs that in concert with the IRS, we've determined have a lot of tipped income. And that includes, of course, many of the programs that your members offer, right? Massage therapy, cosmetology, estheticians, et cetera. For those programs, and we are not going to subject them to sanctions under the new rule until all of the income that's being measured is from years during which this new tipped income legislation is in effect. Remember, it doesn't take effect until 2026. And this is a complicated way of saying it, but this is how it's presented. So what that means is they're still going to run the numbers for you all in the first year, and they'll publish those presumably on their external website where they're going to make all this available. But schools will not be subject to sanctions. And in the first year, the worst sanction you could have would be warnings, right? In the second year, if you are an institution with tipped income that fits into one of these categories, your program fits into one of these categories, and you have enough graduates that they can measure all of your income just in 2026, then you would be subject to sanctions for the first time. They would run the numbers, and then for the first time, so you'd have your warnings that year, right? It'd be like it was the first time they tested you from the standpoint of sanctions. But I also do want to note, if you're a very small school and you have fewer than 30 students in a given year that you're typically graduating, then you would not get over that 30. You wouldn't have more than 30 people with 2026 income that could be measured even in that second year. So they might continue, the waiver might continue for you for example, for another year, because again, the way they've sort of positioned it, they said, we're not going to subject folks to sanctions until we can put together 30 or more people who graduated from this program and measure their income in years during which this legislation is in place. And again, it starts in 2026. That's a complicated way of explaining it, but the short of it is, if you are a program on this list, and the list is in the final rule, right? It's published there, then you're not going to be subject to sanctions in year one. Your numbers will be measured. They may be publicly made available, but there wouldn't be any sanctions. Worst case scenario is you would be subject to sanctions in year two, right? And it's possible you might not be subject to sanctions even further out if you're a small school with really small cohorts. The other really meaningful thing, at least from my perspective, that changed between the proposed and final rule, and there are a couple other smaller tweaks, but the department initially, they have this aggregation scheme. So one of the big concerns Congress and the department have had over 15 years is that a huge percentage of programs are not being measured under these tests because they won't actually publicly run the numbers and put things out there if you have fewer than 30 people graduating in the cohort for privacy reasons. And it turned out that, and when I say huge number, I mean, I forget what it is, but it's like 70, 80%, a huge percentage of programs across the United States, when you think about community colleges and others, have very small cohorts. And so a lot of these programs weren't being tested because they never got over that 30. And so Congress this time around said, look, we really want programs being tested. So what we're going to do is we're going to do this aggregation thing where you're going to start with 1 year. And if they don't have over 30, you go back another year and you keep going back. And in the proposed rule, what they said is they would go back 4 more years for a total of 5 to measure that program. And the program is defined under this rule as a 6-digit zip code, right? So that's the program. And then if they still couldn't get over 30, they would expand and look at all programs within the 4-digit SIP family. So what that meant is they'd look at your program that's being measured, plus any others that are really closely related to it to see. And then they'd go back another 5 years to see if they could get over 30. And then finally, they'd extend it to the 2-digit SIP level. And for those who aren't familiar with SIP codes and things, just to understand, when we say the 2-digit level, like for healthcare programs, that's like everything. But everything from physical therapist to a chiropractor to MD to everything's in that bucket. So that would be a huge group to look at, right? And you're getting a lot of data that's not really relevant to that specific program. So the department in the final rule got a lot of pushback, and they said that's just too broad. It doesn't make sense if you're measuring the outcomes of my yoga program to be including graduates of an MD program. That doesn't make sense. And the department said, okay, you're right, doesn't make sense. So what they're going to do is they're going to start with that 6-digit SIP. They're going to look at your specific program, and the first year will be for graduates who graduated in 2020, 2021. And they'll go back just 3 additional years. So you'll have a 4-year group. And then if they still can't get over 30, then they will expand to the 4-digit SIP family, and they'll go back 4 years. But that's it. That's as far as the aggregation will go. And that's actually important as relates to replacement programs, which I know we may talk about in a little bit, but it directly impacts sort of what you can roll out to replace maybe programs that might be failing, and know that they won't somehow be caught up in this aggregation scheme. I don't know. Again, it's really hard to explain these things without big, great pictures, but hopefully that was somewhere in the realm of understandable.
Let's take a short break to hear a word from our sponsors. Elevate your bodywork career with Anatomy Train's Structural Integration Certification, ATSI. Discover how to map the pattern and shape the change through inspiring lectures, hands-on body reading, and practical techniques you can use in your practice right away. Join us for ATSI Maine 2026 to 2027, where Tom Myers will personally kick off this transformative professional training. Learn more at anatomytrains.com/ATSI. Let's get back to our conversation.
Okay, so the taxes that you claim when you file in 2027, so your 2026 taxes, those are going to be the first ones that are not subject to tip tax. And I want to hammer home the importance of encouraging your students, your alumni, practitioners you work with, everybody claiming their tips on their income. And I know that there are some rumors and some rumblings about, well, that feels like a trap, or what if this is just a way to kind of target me for auditing or whatever. That's not how this is going to work. The federal government is looking at a way to make life more accessible for tipped workers. They are trying to find a way that they can get that data, because the IRS has never had that data. We don't actually know what percentage of schools would pass this test, because we don't know what the actual tipped income is. So I really want to encourage everybody listening to report your tips. You are tax-free up to $25,000. That's a large amount of money. And if everybody does report it, then this all might be a moot point. We might be looking at, as things roll out in 2027 and 28, that all of our schools pass a test, or a majority of them do. And so that is a possibility. And I think that's one of the safest things that you can do right now to protect the industry and your program. And I also want to note that this is not going to be seamless. The calculations are coming from the IRS. I think they call it something kind of nebulous, like a income data agency or something, but they mean the IRS.
Yeah, it's going to be the IRS.
Yeah. But that department has not had a commissioner since August of 2025. The workforce was cut by 1/3 at the start of President Trump's second term. So things are going to be, I think, a little bit messy. That might be my cynicism coming out. But there's still a chance that either incomplete data or the median income will still be too low and schools won't pass the test. So I want to kind of talk about other options. There are, and I do want to touch on opting in early, which is an option that we're getting kind of conflicting information on. But I would love to jump to what we were talking about earlier with changing zip codes. So there are two options that I'm aware of that schools can choose right now. And that would be voluntary discontinuation of a program, which, we don't want anybody to have to do, but that's an option so that they can retain those federal funds through the teach out of that program. And then there's also the option to change a zip code or to change the credential level. So can you talk about both of those options a little bit?
Yeah. So I would probably not recommend, and by the way, talk to your counsel, do what you think is right for you. This is just Aaron's opinion.
Yeah, we should say that none of this is legal advice.
Yeah, this is not legal advice. This is just my opinion. But as someone who has, lived and breathed this for 15 years, my advice would probably be not to choose the voluntary teach out option. That was actually a concept that I introduced along with a couple of other people. And the real reason we introduced it, when the department first proposed the rule, there was nothing like that. And the concern was really for like 4-year programs. You could be a freshman in a 4-year program that has never even been tested. And that program could lose eligibility at the end of your sophomore year. And so there was no way that a school could possibly get those students graduated with funding, right? And we said, well, that's not okay. I mean, if a school's willing to teach out the program voluntarily, they ought to be able to secure funds, at least for the duration, so that those students can get out of the program. But for shorter programs, if you got a 6-month or 12-month or, 18-month program, when you find out the first time that your program has failed, you've still got probably a few more months before you would fail the second time. So you could still have a little time But actually, it's going to be even more than that because the department is suggesting they're going to put out the first round of calculations and notify schools of how they did in spring of 27. Those calculations won't become effective until July 1, right? And then that means the second round you would get in spring of 28, and those wouldn't become effective until July 28. So if you find out in March of 27 that you've got a failing program, again, you still got 18 months before that program actually becomes ineligible. And if it's a 6 or 8 or 12-month program, you could continue to enroll and be thoughtful about it and still responsibly teach out that program and fund everybody without needing to do the voluntary teach out. And the downside of the voluntary teach out is two things happen. I mean, one is, and we agreed to this out of the gates, the school has to make that call within 120 days of the initial notification. So you got to make that decision really early on. But the other thing is, as is often the case, after we introduced the concept, which was pretty simple when we introduced it, all the other cooks in the kitchen got involved and a lot of other trappings got added to it. So if you choose that, you are agreeing to a number of other restrictions around stopping enrollments and how long it is until you can reintroduce the program. So all this is to say, for shorter programs, again, take a hard look at it. But my view is it is probably not worthwhile because given the time frames, you can still teach out your program responsibly without having to make that decision within 120 days. For a 4-year bachelor's degree program, you really don't have that option, right? The other idea is replacement programs. I look, again, I've spent 15 years on this. I've walked through every version of this thing. I've been deeply involved in every version of it. I will tell you, I think replacement programs right now are about the only option that schools have. And that is in part because, and this is really important for your listeners to understand, like the first year that they're measuring, they're going to be looking at people who graduated in 2021 and what they made in 2025. I mean, it's today as we're recording this, we're already, well into the second half of 2026. Those numbers are all cooked. There's nothing you can do today to change who graduated in 2021 and what they made in 2025. And in fact, even if you changed your program today, right, it's still going to be, they're going to be looking at people graduated from your program for the next 6 or 7 years before today. Right? Because they got to go through 22, 23 and 23, 24. So your ability to impact what's happening by changing your program or trying to change the labor market is probably pretty limited. So what can you do in the next year? I really think replacement programs are one of the most viable options. Not an easy option for a single purpose school, cosmetology, massage therapy, et cetera. And let me be really clear about a couple of things. When this first came along, both during NEGREG and after I saw the proposed rule, I thought there would be more opportunity for institutions to roll out potentially programs that were within the same 4-digit SIP family, but a different 6-digit SIP code program. So it'd be a different program, but closely related, right? I think that's going to be problematic because of some positions that the department took and articulated in the final rule, the commentary to the final rule. And specifically what they've said is that they are going to subject every new program you roll out to the test right away. By the way, we did not talk about this during rulemaking, and I was very surprised that the department took this position. I don't think it's cooked into the law, and I'm hopeful that maybe you all in the communities can persuade them to take a different position. But what they're saying then is, if you roll out a new program that's a different SIP code, right? And you've never had that, the first year you roll out this program, you've never had a completer, much less anyone who's graduated and has earnings 4 years later. They're still going to run the test on the program. And what's going to happen is you're going to have no graduates in the first year, right? So it's going to be a 0. So they're going to start that aggregation process and they'll go back 4 years. We don't have any graduates. It's a new program. So then they're going to move to the 4-digit SIP and they're going to start in 2021 and work their way back. Well, if you have a related program that you discontinued because it had failing earnings, the earnings from that related program, because it's in the same 4-digit SIP family, are going to be sucked in. So your new program is going to be measured ostensibly based exclusively on the earnings of the related program that has failed. And you may not even be offering anymore. I think that personally, I've articulated this. I would tell the department this if they asked me. I think this is a surprising outcome. I do not think this is what Congress intended. When I look at the way that the One Big Beautiful Bill Act is constructed, I think they want schools to be looking at programs that may not be performing well and to redesign those programs and resit. So going back to my example with Juilliard, if Juilliard's Bachelor's of Music is failing and they say, okay, we're going to retool it so it focuses on business instead of performance. And we think that'll get people different kinds of jobs in the music business industry and they'll make more money and that'll be a But the problem is, if they roll that out, it's going to be tested based on the old bachelor's degree's earnings. And I don't think you'll ever get a chance to really launch that program potentially. So what do? So the aggregation is limited to programs at the same credential level, right? And that are in the same 4-digit family, if they have some overlapping SOC codes. And by the way, if you don't know what all this SIP and SOC code stuff means, go ask your financial aid director and they can help you decipher all of that, right? But what that means is if you've got a program that's a non-degree program that's failing, and you roll out an associate degree program, that program will not be aggregated with the one that's failing. They never cross credential levels. So if it's at a new credential level, they will not be aggregated together. Or if you roll out a new program that's outside of that 4-digit SIP family, so if it's different enough that you would have able to be in a different 4-digit SIP family, it will never be aggregated. Or if you roll out a replacement program that's in the same 4-digit SIP family, but has no overlapping SOC codes with the failing program, it would also not be aggregated. So if any of those, it doesn't have to be all of those things, but if any one of those things is true, it's at a different credential level, it's outside the 4-digit SIP of the failing program, or it's inside the 4-digit SIP, but there's no overlapping SOC codes, that's bulletproof because that program will not be aggregated with any other programs. So that means it will be tested for the first time on its own merit when you have graduates who have earnings. So if you got, an 18-month program you roll out, you're looking at 5.5 years from when you roll it out the first time that it's going to be measured. That's the only really bulletproof approach right now that I can offer. And I think if you roll out a replacement program that doesn't fit into one of those buckets and is within the 4-digit SIP and have some overlapping SOC codes with the failing programs, you run the risk of it being aggregated with your failing program and tested based on the earnings of your failing program. And it may kill your new program before it can really get off the ground.
That is excellent information. I also want to point out that if this is an option that your school is considering, you need to be working with pros who do this. This isn't something, if you don't have experience in this type of thing, you need to be working with your financial aid pros, consultants, attorneys, perhaps a firm that has a practice in higher ed. Thompson Coburn, I don't know. That is something that is complicated. There are other tweaks to it, like you need to roll out a new program before you voluntarily discontinue the failing one, so that you don't automatically put yourself in the danger zone. There are a lot of other details about that, and I'm sure we could go on forever. But I do want to ask a little bit about the early opt-in. So there is an option for you as a school to say, we'll just go ahead and start using the new metric. And there are a couple of ways you can do that. You can elect to, or you can do it by default by not reporting the previous year's FETGE data like you normally do. So the department has specifically said if you don't report that data, even if it's an accident, the department will assume that you are choosing to opt into the new metric early. Is there anything that you want to add about that? I mean, our stance is we would rather schools not opt in early. It we think limits folks on certain things, especially litigation, and there are a couple of other issues there that we would rather schools avoid, but it might be a good option for some schools. So is there anything you want to add on that?
Well, I can offer you my view. And again, this is just Aaron's view, but here's what I would say. The only reason I can think of not to opt in, not to go ahead and adopt the new rule, is if you were trying to preserve standing for litigation. So, there is current litigation out there right now where the existing gainful employment financial value transparency rule is being challenged in court, which is meaningful and important litigation. And it is theoretically possible that if every institution that is currently a plaintiff or potentially a plaintiff in that litigation opted in, that a court could determine that no one has standing because no one is actually governed by the existing gainful employment rule anymore. You're now all governed by this new thing, and that's not the subject of the litigation. So if I were a party to that litigation, and hopefully you would know that if you were, or a trade association or someone, and I was concerned about preserving standing for the litigation, I would absolutely have a very meaningful conversation with the lawyers managing that litigation. I think that's important. But let's say just for a minute that you are not an institution that is involved in that litigation in any way, right? I'm personally not clear on what the advantage would be, and I'm happy to explain why. So to your point, the current rule is still in place and schools have to report under the current rule. Let's say, I'm going to make this up, 80 data points as of October 1st. It's more or less than that, but there's a collection of data. We compared what has to be reported under the gainful employment rule, the current rule, and what will have to be reported under the new earnings accountability rule. And the truth is, they're very close. There are only 3 or 4 data points that under the new rule, schools no longer have to report. Among those are cost and debt data, because the new rule doesn't feature a debt to earnings test, right? So they're actually super close. And what the department said, and you got it exactly right, Laura, they said, okay, if you decide to report, but when you report, you don't report those 3 or 4 things that aren't included in the new rule, then we're going to take that to mean that you are electing to early implement the new earnings accountability rule, and you're stepping away from gainful employment financial value transparency. But here's what I want folks to understand. And I've had some conversation with the department behind the scenes on this. I do not have an official answer yet. I think an official answer is forthcoming. But I think that the department is going to calculate earnings accountability rates for everyone, whether you opt in or not. They are going to calculate, this is my view, I believe they will calculate earnings accountability rates for everyone. And everyone will see those in the spring. And come July 1 of next year, everyone will be held accountable, because that will be the law of the land. So I don't think whether you opt in or opt out changes whether you will have earnings accountability rates in the first year and be held accountable for those earnings accountability rates, subject to tipped income and all those other sort of exclusions that apply for everyone in every circumstance. But I think everyone will be under the new law come July 1 of next year. And if you are not subject to the tipped income exception or something like that, I think you'll be sanctioned under that new rule, without regard to whether you early implement. So the difference is, if you don't early implement, you will also have gainful employment rates calculated. And those rates could be distributed in March. And then if they are, and you fail, you could have to start making warnings in March of next year under the gainful employment rule, because it's in effect right now. You will have been notified that you failed, and the impact of failing the first year is having to start making student warnings. My concern would be, these tests are a little different. It is conceivable that you could have a program that would fail under the current gainful employment rule, but not fail under the new earnings accountability rule. I mean, the department goes out of its way in the final rule to talk about how their rule is actually not as severe as the existing gainful employment rule. I don't know if that's true or not. I haven't done all that analysis, but that's their position. It is, again, at least theoretically possible to me that someone would only fail gainful employment and not fail earnings accountability. So my concern is, if you don't opt in and you get a gainful employment calculation, you might have to start providing warnings to your students in March of next year. Whereas if you do opt in and you're only under earnings accountability, you would not have to start making warnings. And then come July 1, if you passed earnings accountability, you still wouldn't have to make earnings. The other thing is, there's no tipped income exception for the gainful employment rule. So even if you're one of these tipped income programs, if you fail gainful employment, you might have to make warnings between, I'll say again, March, when maybe the rates come out, and July 1st until that rule goes away. And then as of July 1, because you're in that tipped income category, you would not have to make warnings because you're not subject to sanctions in the first year. So for me, at least the way I read the law, it seems like it's only downside, unless you're trying to preserve standing because you're a litigant in the gainful employment litigation. But I think that we are waiting for the department to give very clear and decisive guidance on this point. I understand there's been a lot of angst in among schools and in the community about what to do here. And that was part of what I highlighted to the department when I was chatting with them is, folks are trying to make a decision. I mean, it's you still got a month or so, but October 1st is coming soon. And I do think the department needs to be really clear on the consequences of early implementation. Hopefully you'll see something in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I have been told that at the very least, a comprehensive FAQ is going to be coming out from the department very soon. Hopefully that should clear up some questions. And again, this is an evolving situation, and things are subject to change. There's also a lot of litigation that's already out there. I think there's more on the horizon. So there's a lot coming up. And of course, there's another rulemaking, another neg reg coming up, the Christmas tree one. So maybe we'll try to drag you back on here to talk about that one when it comes up.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you so much, Aaron, for joining us and for giving us your expertise. It's so nice to hear from an attorney rather than someone who plays one on TV to actually talk about this stuff credibly. Is there anything else you want to throw in before we wrap up?
I'll just say, I think it's really important to the extent that the community is engaging in this process, and that's from the rules being introduced to commenting to being engaged now, trying to talk to their representatives, folks on the Hill. I think this is not done yet. There are still a lot of conversations happening. There's always the opportunity to impact or influence Congress, but even beyond that, a lot of important things are decided by the department at the subregulatory level. So those are decisions that could be made and then changed potentially and could be very impactful for this community. So all this is to say, I think listening to podcasts like this, watching webinars, reading the FAQs, engaging with your trade associations and your representatives is important. It does move the needle. Sometimes I think people start to feel like it doesn't. And I just want to affirm it absolutely does, and it's worth your time and effort.
100%. We would not have gotten this 1-year delay without the advocacy for our members and other folks in the profession. So thank you so much, Aaron. We're so grateful for you, and I will throw it back to our host.
Thanks again to Maggie Stasek, Laura Puryear, and Aaron Lacey for helping unpack this complicated issue that could have an impact across professional education. And thanks to our friends at ASCP SD Talk for allowing us to share this conversation with you, our valued listeners. Issues affecting education, funding, and the future of our schools ultimately affect all of us working in the massage and wellness professions. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on the ABMP Podcast.
Precision Neuromuscular Therapy has been teaching high-quality seminars for over 20 years across the country. Founded by Doug Nelson, PNMT uses problem-solving skills and precise treatment options to get powerful results for your clients. PNMT seminars focus on honing your assessment and palpation skills to precisely target the source of your client's pain while understanding the why behind the what. Meet us in a hands-on seminar or online in the PNMT portal and let us join you on your learning journey. Learn more at pnmt.org.